Okay, red light means we are recording. Good stuff. Welcome everybody to another, we don't know the title yet. We are the same as that charging network with Super 7 OEMs. We have no title, but more on that at the end of the show. Yeah. It is a show now. We have a fairly firm down time slot. This will be, as far as we can tell, for foreseeable future, Wednesdays, 5 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Yeah. Don't get that messed up. Mm-hmm. This will be when we gather, and we'll have as many guests as we can squeeze into the chairs, and we've got some lined up already. So that's all for the future. But today we are talking the future of Electrify America. Welcome, Eric.
Yes. Hello. And Jay Donaldson. Hello. And Toad Kapuz. All right, I'm not going to try to pronounce all the names.
Stuck in the brand tab. I need to go back to the chat.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're figuring out this as we go along. As you can tell, this will be a smoothly oiled machine by the time we get to episode 100.
Yeah. Smoothly oiled like an EV. Now,
you get my free oil change every month with Chevy, so I'm sorted with that.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we don't want to waste too much time. Actually, I have the timers this evening because our first 10 minutes we are going to dedicate to some kind of topical or news piece of the week. So this week it's going to be the EV adventures, shall we call them, of Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm, who took a trip from Charlotte, North Carolina, over to Memphis, Tennessee, which I'm reliably informed is only 650 miles, something like that. But she did run into problems, as people may have expected, and it kind of comes into the Electrify America topic. But what caught your eye on this one, Eric?
Well, I mean, just in general, and first of all, shout out to Darren Orange, who maybe we'll be hearing from him later at some point. But yeah, he put me onto this story, and it's just sort of, I feel like kind of ridiculous on its face because it's not a typical use case. And I mean, to me, it brings up the biggest question is, does our public charging infrastructure need to facilitate a convoy, right? Or an entourage, which is essentially what she was traveling with. You know, they listed out a number of different cars, mostly electric vehicles, but it sounds like they also had some spotter vehicles and some gas-powered vehicles as well. But are our charging sites really expected to be supporting? Like, when was the last time an average person traveled with 3 or 4 other vehicles on the road, all traveling at the same time and wanting to make the same stops, mind you? That's the other big thing too. So this was very important for them to kind of hit the same locations, and they're trying to travel together as a group. And, through an area where, I think Walter that we had on would have a bit better understanding of that Georgia sort of area in terms of the infrastructure along that route. But it just begs the question of, is this really even a reasonable use case? And then the other thing that jumped out to me is people were really jumping on this idea that there were no working chargers, and that her Jennifer Granholm's assistant basically blocked the only working charger with their gas-powered car. And that's not how I read the story at all. I read that it was the only available charger, and that they were blocking it and trying to hold it, for the energy secretary. And someone was waiting in a Bolt EV, I guess, trying to use the charger on a hot day with kids in the car. And to me, like, my immediate reaction to that was, this is the problem I have with reserved charging stalls, not just the fact that you have to use a gas-powered car to travel in an EV. Because I for some reason or another, I think that was people's takeaway, and I don't see how you get there from that. Right? Sure, it's a busy charger. There's only one available stall. Her assistant probably said, "Ooh, I better block this so that when she gets here, she can charge right away." Well, I think that was a poor call, right? Like, you should have said, "Oh, you get here, you wait in line like everybody else, so you have the same experience that everybody else has. So you wait for the next available charger. You don't block a stall or reserve a stall, as some of these network providers are planning to do, so that the people who are currently there can't access an open charger. And that's the problem to me, but that doesn't seem to be people's takeaway from it. So, but I'm done. That was it. That's all I have.
No, you went on to the etiquette of it and the kind of logistics, which makes sense to me. What it usually does, and it did this time for me, is send me down a rabbit hole of PlugShare to look at the site they visited and all the nearby options they could have gone to. Which was, it's actually interesting. There were plenty more around the place, but that, as you say, they weren't really suitable for people traveling in a convoy. It actually kind of is the little microcosm of all of the things we've been talking about in the episode so far. So there was a Rivian Adventure Network site just down the road, exclusive to Rivian for the moment. So that's one of the topics, right? That we just, at some point this has to open up. Tesla Supercharger, which was actually at a Circle K, which is building its own network. So people are like, well, I could go to a Circle K, but that's a Supercharger, so that kind of stuff. And then the rest of the infrastructure was this mishmash of there were CPE 250s, one paired, station, which would have been fine maybe for, an Ioniq 5, but there's only 2 stations there. They would have been sharing the power anyway. And there's just this mishmash of solo stalls, old hardware, exclusive networks, all the stuff that we kind of, lament needing to be aligned. That's kind of what I took away from it. I was looking at the map like, this wouldn't have been what I planned if I was in a group of people, which is not, likely to happen anyway. If my group would be, including Tesla people, and they would have gone to the supercharger. But it's one of those kind of, I'm glad they went through it at least, except for blocking that charger for the Bolt, because, this is a scarce resource and we need to treat it as such.
Yeah, that was definitely ill-advised in my opinion, but I was going to mention too, just a similar circumstance traveling up I-15. So those of you in Southern California are familiar with the route out of Los Angeles up into Las Vegas, and Hesperia has a 10-stall Electrify America charger. I pulled in, being the good Bolt EV driver I am, I used the 350 kilowatt stall because I was coming back from a fishing trip and I needed to grab some ice. And I ran in, and by the time I came back,
forums. So let me just post that to the Ioniq 5 forums so they can start linking for you.
Exactly. Yeah, and I come back, and all of a sudden the 10 stall chargers are filling up with EVs, and I was there for less than 10 minutes just grabbing ice. So I threw it in my ice chest. I was out, right, and just opened up that 350 stall, let everybody else fill up those chargers, and I drove down the road to the EVgo where I was going to have dinner anyway. And it was completely full to the point where there was a Bolt EV on a level 2 charger. And I'm like, well, that sucks. Wait, this charge point is right across the place where I want to go to dinner. So I just drove over there and was using a CPE 250, and it was wide open. So I get people's point about experienced EV drivers will deal with these circumstances a little bit different. And then I guess another shameless plug for you with your recent Circle K, that Hesperia Victorville area has 2 brand new Circle K chargers built there too. So now there's even more redundancy. But again, this is the mindset of, I think, an experienced EV owner traveling on their own versus an assistant trying to set up a convoy for the energy secretary through, just not knowing the culture, the etiquette, or what's available.
Robert here pretty much nails it with, creating a PR event. This is, obviously the cars they chose in were well choreographed. They had a Lyric, a Bolt, and a Ford F-150 Lightning, and you can see the links there to American manufacturing and, OEMs. So there's all this, we've had actually a few of these, and we're bumping up against our time because we wanted to keep this to 10 minutes. But, at some point we should discuss the Electrify America new CEO's road trip, and how that kind of aligns with the reality.
Right.
And same with Jim Farley taking that trip, all this kind of stuff. But we've done pretty well there. I think we squeezed it into more or less 10 minutes. Unless
I definitely have more to say on the Farley trip too. Let's move on.
So we did well. So let me jump back through the comments to say good evening to everybody. So Jay Donaldson, Todd, Brian Ribby is around. Thank you for joining us. Electrified Light Vehicles, good evening. Network Architect Channel, who we know as Walter, who was on one of our previous shows. Hi, Walter.
Hey, Walter. Yeah.
Yeah, Big Barney, Ivan, Robert, and Lyric Rocks. So that's a good way to. At least she chose a vehicle that Walter approved. So.
Hey, I would travel in a
Big
Lyric.
Barney does not agree. I would happily take a Lyric to drive, but this is a melting pot, so we showcase all this stuff. Let's see, Mike. No, you didn't miss anything. We are doing a new thing where we're discussing a news story at the start for the first 10 minutes, so everything actually gives everybody time to get in. And for exactly this scenario, you now join us for the main event. So yeah, it's really to go through Electrify America's position at the moment, and we may find I start to.
Well, I think that the next point we were talking about is the EA mandated investment cycles, right? Yeah. And I was going to defer to you because I feel like you, Steve, are a little bit more knowledgeable about the actual 4-cycle schedule that EA has.
Yeah, I mean it's so as context, we are bumping up against, and these may be arbitrary or they may be meaningful depending on what you're reading and who's in charge at the time. It's a new CEO, so we could well have deprecating of those cycles, but they are mandated by the investment. For a quick step back, I'm sure everybody that's watching this does know, but Electrify America is the result of Dieselgate mandated investment from the federal government. It was $2 billion overall over the course of 10 years. So that was split into tranches of 500 million every 30 months. So we are now bumping up against the end next year of cycle 3, which we'll get onto a little bit here. But cycle 4 is the fourth and final 30-month period of investment. So at the moment, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the only thing I would add to that, though, Steve, is of that $2 billion, $1 billion can only be spent in California, which is a really sort of important, I guess.
Yeah, I think you were close. It wasn't quite half, was it? It was something like 800 million and 1.2 billion was, but yeah, that's near as makes the difference. California has certainly, I mean, it was interesting, the history of it. Kind of California was slow out the gates. I remember expecting it to all be over there in terms of investment, and then it was the first one was over here in Massachusetts. So we won something there. But
you were checking out their headquarters site while I was looking at a 50 kilowatt charger in Torrance.
The one and only time my charging has been ahead of yours, I think. So yeah, I mean, before we get into the rabbit hole of all this, my background here, this is kind of parts of our approach with this. We picture this as doom and gloom, and is Electrify America, on the chopping block, dead man walking, all this kind of stuff. This is actually an unfair picture to really portray. This is over at Albany, New York. When this, if you look at it, these side handles show that it's that old. Anyone remember FSEC? The most disastrous of all the hardware providers, at least on the New York thruway route. So, this is the worst that it's been there. I don't know if I can easily change my background here to, I think it might actually be the most renovated site in the Electrify America space, because as we changed they replaced this stuff because the FSEC units were so bad. They changed it to ABB stations, and that was through to the end of 2022. And then more recently, it's started to look like this. So the latest, I believe, they're Signet units out there, and I'll leave that one up just to be nice to the people at Electrify America who get battered every week on every other channel. So we'll give them some help here. But you can see that this kind of represents the development of that site. There are also Tesla power batteries on this battery backup at this site. Right. But it's that kind of thing over the years of it being a little bit decrepit with old hardware, as they started with those 4 providers over in cycle 1. You move through cycle 2, and there was a rapid expansion. One of the goals there was to have 800 stations in the ground by the end of that cycle, which they achieved, to be fair. It seems odd now that we talk about them decelerating, but that expansion did rip through a lot of locations and crossed a couple of cross-country routes in that first the the middle kind of portion of the investment. And then we kind of moved into cycle 3, and that, you know, although it doesn't align with Minimas, that was definitely the difficult second album. You know, they really really slowed down. They had a lot of these renovations, and it seems like a lot of the equipment is now going to, you know, sites that are being like this one, you know, have the old hardware, troublesome stuff ripped out of the ground. And we'll come on to hardware in a little bit here. But, you know, it's all going to these sites. And I do have the occasional one. A video went up today that you can check out after this on a new site that they've almost activated over in Pine City in Minnesota. So, you know, there are new sites coming online, but the cycle 3 investment kind of wanted to focus on more regional routes, getting an extra 2 cross-country routes. They had some goals there, and they've still got 9 months really, I guess, to achieve this. So there may be a kind of late burst, but we really haven't moved much beyond. I think we're still somewhere in the 800 to 900 stations kind of ballpark. And I haven't really looked at the map recently as to how many of those are close to coming online. But, you know, they're going to struggle, I think, to complete those 2 extra cross-country routes, which I think one of them is across North Dakota. And, you know, some of those more northern routes where I think they've got a big gap in the middle, but they've also had problems over on the West Coast around that Washington, Oregon kind of area. So, you know, there's some history there, and the kind of bringing it full circle is that cycle 4 doesn't really have anywhere near as many details as cycle 3 and the previous ones. Obviously, they haven't got a plan in place yet, maybe forthcoming, but it's getting pretty close to the wire now for 2024. And there's no clear, it just says looking to the future, which is, aren't we all? But, you know, this is not what future is that, and this leads us into.
Well, yeah, the hardware discussion, right? But yeah, I was going to say, Steve, I do also want to give Electrify America a bit of credit here because, you know, when I look at a network, the 2 biggest factors I'm looking at are what I refer to as concentration and coverage. And I've mentioned this before. And of the public charging providers, Electrify America is the only one that actually addressed that in any significant way, where other than just every now and then a regional route, they were covering full-on corridors, cross-country corridors, north, south, east, west, and the concentration of chargers at the site. They had a minimum of 3, right? Which at the time, now it doesn't seem like much at all, but at the time were some of the bigger public charging sites. And now you see them with 8, 10, 14 chargers per site. They were the ones that are doing much more. But to Steve's point, there are still huge gaps along both, not just highways, but also interstates. And that's something that has to absolutely be addressed with cycle 4, in my opinion. And I think the NEVI funds, or the NEVI sort of plan, where they're talking about requiring chargers every 50 miles, I think Electrify America needs to try to make good on that model at a minimum level, right? Just to have at least a charging site every 50 miles along every interstate, and in my opinion, every U.S. highway or major like highway, state highway or interstate highway.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we're covering, I'm covering your side at the moment, but these are the kind of areas that, you know, they were looking to bridge with. This is from the cycle 3 funding plan. And this is all down in the description. I've put the links to these PDFs. This is a summary. There are deeper dive documents if you really love this stuff. But, you know, I don't think from what I've seen on the channel, on the website, that a lot of these locations are filled in, at least in the Dakotas. If I move over to your side, you've kind of got, those are the 2, right? They're trying to, initially they had done the southern kind of routes and the central routes across Kansas, Colorado, Utah. Now we've got kind of the northern Dakotas, Montana, Wyoming, those kind of routes trying to be filled in. So I don't, you know, again, it's not over yet, so we can't really judge them on the finish, but there's some stuff to go here, and then some other stuff in the, you know, focusing on metro areas. But I think that's kind of like, you know, at this point we're looking at the cross country routes. That's the biggest piece, right?
Yeah. Just, I mean, there are a few just real pain points, like New Mexico is a big one, Highway 95 through through Nevada is a big one. US Highway 395 north of Reno is a big one. And then, like you said, through Wyoming, the Dakotas. Yeah, they have some pain points that they need to address that aren't just big city sites. So, yeah,
This is kind
see.
of an interesting point here as well in terms of coverage. You know, Mike says he's used mostly Southern California to Washington. It was last year, and now he thinks it's good luck, and doesn't know if he would try that trip. I've been more and more, although I've gone to some different regions, but the routes that I travel regularly have only got better and better in my estimation. You know, it's only, you know, and again, we're talking about experience versus someone just setting out for the first time, right? I know exactly, having traveled certain routes like the one over to Ohio, where to stop and which ones are going to be good, which ones are not so good. But it is, you know, invariably the choice, aside from having the complimentary charging plan, which skews the kind of, you know, places we would go. It is the new Electrify America sites, the Albany one that I mentioned, the Buffalo, you know, or the Evolve New York sites that are also on Electrify America. So those, you know, in my travels have been pretty solid.
Yeah, and I would say too, though, I think maybe you and I agree on this, Steve, but I have not seen a significant downturn in EA's reliability, right? And if anything, they're slightly more reliable than they were last year, and now they're significantly more reliable than they were the first year that they were deployed. But a 75% charger uptime just isn't good enough with the current population, because what you're going to run into, like you're talking about that Washington to California corridor, it's less about whether the chargers are working better than they were last year, because they probably are. It's more about the fact that those chargers are going to be full most of the time. I mean, there are, like Steve said, always going to be some problem sites, but for the most part, the chargers are functioning similarly to the way they were when they went in the ground. It's just now you have 4, 5, 6 times as many EVs on site, you know, just attempting to use the same chargers as you. You know, and I kind of bring this up because I think I was talking about their complimentary session here, but just showcasing some of these sites that you see in California where, you know, they're just always full. So yeah, I guess again, yeah. So like, just like this is the Firebow Shell site. You know, on a busy weekend, you are going to see this thing completely full. There's another one in Ontario on, again, I-15, where you see a Mustang Mach-E, a Taycan, and an ID4 all waiting for a completely full. And this is not a small charging site. This is eight charging stalls, all of them working. You know, and people are still having to queue up and wait, where 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that wouldn't even have been a concern. So
yeah, that's definitely been the my initial argument was that this is, I think I leaned into a little heavy, was that this is mostly congestion. Like, this is 90%, you know, just a lot more people trying to use it and people getting frustrated that one charge is offline. I've, you know, having been across the Midwest and seen more derated chargers in places where that was the only option I could use potentially, I've started to think maybe more, there's a mix of, you know, these derated chargers being a problem, extending that out, leaving people on site for longer, then a mix of more EVs trying to use them, people going at peak times, and what you've highlighted in your videos of a lack of either awareness or willingness to use other charging networks, use other options. You know, I'm not waiting in line unless there really is no other option. I'm almost always trying to roll through to another place. Happy to use EVgo equipment, has been, you know, really good for us. ChargePoint express units, when they're paired in a pinch, will be, you know, 120 kilowatts. It's still perfectly fine. And even, you know, we've been up to Vermont and to upstate New York recently, and there's a one kind of pinch point that anyone who travels through New Hampshire will know, up in West Lebanon, right on the border with Vermont. There are at least 3 or 4 different options around there. Granted, they are all sub 100 kilowatt, kind of 50, 60 kilowatt in some cases, charge points, flows up there, this kind of thing. But if the alternative is waiting in what is often, for want of a better word, a clusterfunk of EVs just trying to figure out who the hell's going next, I'm going to roll out of that parking lot as quickly as possible and use the charger, which is inevitably down the road, just kind of, and maybe I'll charge a bit less. Maybe I'll just leave it on longer and take a walk. I don't know, but it's more attractive than sitting in the Walmart parking lot trying to figure out who's going to go next on the plug.
Yeah, it's even more attractive than having your assistant drive ahead of you in a gas car and block the charging zone. So.
Would that we could do that. 50 kilowatts is out of date. It certainly is, but if the other option is waiting in a line for an hour, then I am going to the 50 kilowatt. I'm happily exploring the area or the businesses that put it in the first place. So
and don't forget. Yeah, I was going to say, don't forget efficient EV, Steve. 4 miles per kilowatt hour, 50 kilowatt charger. You're doing 200 miles in a dinner.
I'm reliably informed that 4 miles per kilowatt hour is possible in an Ioniq 5. I haven't been able to do it yet, but maybe it should slow down, or the mass pike should start ticketing people. Let's see. Is the wait because of 100% charge people? Not in my experience. I mean, maybe in city areas, I have seen people, rideshare drivers. But my advice in general is don't try and charge around metro areas unless you really that's a smaller metro area. I learned this in Chicago again the hard way. It's a mess. Once you see it and there's people lining up, just move out, find somewhere else. Invariably, unless it's one of these metro areas in an area that isn't well served, cities have alternatives. Just go and find that alternative and use that instead.
Yeah.
There usually are ways around this, I find. Let's see, once the free Electrify America charging starts expiring, will people distribute to other networks? Absolutely. I think I'm seeing people already say that even with their network complimentary charging plan, if there's a place where they can pay and get a faster charge or a more reliable charge, they'll pay for reliability every time.
Well, and that's kind of why I keep wanting to harp on EVgo a little bit, right? Is because I know that they already have hundreds of their 350 kilowatt charging sites out. So, these are an option for people who would be fine with paying but not waiting.
Yep, this is courtesy of Walter, by the way. So, thank you for this footage, Walter. These are the ones that they'll be using, the Delta 350 kilowatt chargers at the Pilot Flying J. And if you're hankering for time afterwards and more EV charging content, you can go and watch our Ultium Charge 360 session with Walter as well.
Thank you, Walter.
Thank you, Walter. Let me just refer to my notes unless you have a jump.
Well, yeah, I was going to say we kind of did a segue here, because we wanted to talk about whether hardware was the make or break point for Electrify America, because part of it, you're right, is this whole logistics thing. Are they going to improve their sites? Are they going to expand their sites? Are they going to meet those NEVI guidelines? And these are all questions that I had as well, right? Is what's their criteria for expanding? Because we've heard over and over again, people say their 4 charger sites just aren't good enough for an interstate. Even if you're talking about rural interstates, we're seeing 4 charging sites being overwhelmed. So at some point, when are we going to start seeing that expansion of those interstate corridors to 8, 10, 12 chargers, even in the more rural interstates? And then I guess Anabi, the Electrify Canada.
It's harder to track Electrify Canada because it's such a smaller footprint. Petro, I know, I may try and get back on this pretty soon because Canada is on my list, but it's mostly in the areas. And when I travel to Canada, it's Ontario, the Toronto part, and Quebec, Montreal, all of which have very good charging options. So even if you don't try Electrify Canada, there are 4 or 5 other options. I know Petro Canada has had a lot of complaints with their cross-country route. Electrify Canada seems to be a very almost entirely separate entity. You can't use the Electrify
Yeah.
America app up there. It's an entirely separate app. They don't seem to report any of the news. It's a separate website from Electrify America, so I don't know if I can really help you on that one, except to say that Canada
Yeah,
has
I don't even know
multiple clinicals.
are they even part of the cycle funding?
No, it's not. They're not under that that remit.
Yeah.
But just in general, of knowing, how they're performing up there, I don't know how much money they have to spend. I'll get onto that though. I need to kind of catch up with the Canadian charging scene in general. So, thank you for the prompt.
But yeah, so like in terms of that the hardware though, because I have some stuff here because I had a very interesting exchange with someone, and I need to preface this because anybody can be an expert, behind a keyboard on social media, so you don't necessarily know who you're talking to. But this individual said that they were one of the first technicians formally trained by Electrify America to maintain their network. And what they were telling me is they were saying that there's been a lot of conflating of different issues. And they were very adamant that the thermistor issue, and this is where maybe me eating crow a little bit, but I would rather be correct than be right. Is that the thermistor issue is strictly an ABB issue. And I'm not sure I 100% agree with him, just because, we've seen this. This is an ABB unit here that I show with the max power being reduced. So I have experienced it, right? That 100 amp charging. But the thing is, it's because of the Huber plus Sooner cables. The thermistor is in the cable. And EVgo did mention this to me as an issue. They said it was the first generation H plus S Radox cable. And EVgo does have experience with ABB. This is their site in Baker, California, where 2 of the units are ABBs. Now, I had issues with these ABB Terra HP, but that was a software issue that was completely separate, that was taken care of. Not a thermistor issue, though I did experience that. And they happened to be installing, or Electrify America happened to install ABB units in the desert Southwest, right? In some of the hottest territories. So a thermistor issue is only going to get worse in those locations. But what this person was telling me, this person that said they were a technician, was telling me is, when you look at something like Signet, it's actually a completely different issue. So if you're seeing reduced power on the Signet chargers, it's actually because they're struggling with their power modules. So they're 175 kilowatt cabinets. They put 2 of them together for 350 kilowatt. They're regularly having modules going out, and that's what's reducing power. And then, I early on, this was like 2019, I experienced this Signet, the Signet surge, right, which is a lot of people have started to experience. Now, the Bolt EV, this, and I froze frame here after this because it kept canceling, but it was already ramping up. It was still ramping up to like 60 kilowatt before the Bolt EV killed the session. Because at that pack voltage, that's already 200 amps, and the Bolt EV says no, we're not taking this much power, we're shutting down. So EV was shutting it down on the Signet side, even though it was getting that massive power spike and power surge from the unit. But we've seen other EVs getting bricked by this, like Rivian, I believe, in particular, was getting bricked by this. I've seen a lot of EGMP cars where people are looking at the display like, what the heck is going on? Because they're seeing it go from 20 kilowatt up to 250 kilowatt and then back down to 20 kilowatt and just yo-yoing back and forth with this weird power. And so apparently all of that is related to the Signet unit. So the reason I think there could be credence to the ABB thermistor issue is ABB and Huber plus Sooner are both Swiss companies. So it's possible that ABB got fast-tracked and they got all of the first generation cables. And so that could be legitimate. That could make sense, that they were the only ones to get those faulty thermistor cables, Radox cables. which means that all of these issues that we are seeing from BTC power units and Signet power units under Electrify America might actually have a lot more to do with the power modules than it does with the thermistors. And in the case of Signet, it can be dangerous. And, we also talk about, I was just using puns, but it's like the BTC burn, right? So this is a recargo station. They actually paid to put these upgraded screens in, but the BTC power units I've just found over time to be really unreliable. And you see those cigarette burns all the time in the screens. And it doesn't matter who the provider is, Caltrans, EVgo here with these cigarette burns, or Electrify America, their BTC power units also have these same sort of issues where the screens, it's just low quality. And then, not to make light of it, but then we also have this BTC burn where we now have 2 Rivian R1Ts that have caught fire while charging on BTC power units. And that last one that you showed was the new BTC power unit. And I think this is where Steve and I are most concerned, right? In the sense that Electrify America has already announced who their new partners are in terms of hardware, and it's BTC Power and Signet. And if we're seeing these sort of systemic issues with these 2 chargers, kind of like your original eFASIC background, Steve, is this something that Electrify America really needs to worry about? And then, while while I'm riffing and going off on a tirade, I figure the other thing I should mention is EVgo recently announced that they received 2 of their BABA, or the Build America, Buy America chargers. This is a Tesla supercharger placard. You see sort of at the bottom of the placard, it edges down that it's made in the USA. These Delta EVgo units are now being built in Plano, Texas. So they're under this BABA compliant, which feeds into the federal funding, all of that. Well, as far as I know, BTC Power and Signet are still built offshore. So are they going to meet this BABA compliance? Does Electrify America have any plans for getting these BABA compliant chargers into their roster that might also just work better, right? So they might be eligible for more funding. They might just work better, be higher quality. And these are the real concerns that we have right now with Electrify America is the hardware partners that they've chosen, is it a liability? So.
Yeah, and do you think, I mean, we've certainly seen Electrify America on a few of these initial NEVI awards. There's only been a handful of states announced so far. But do you think that is a positive in the sense that they will shift this to the BABA criteria and that'll apply to across the board? Or do you think we're going to get even more fragmentation of these NEVI sites that, Electrify America wins money for, although they're not a big piece of the puzzle at the moment? Those may be held to a higher standard or may have higher quality materials than whatever is in the pipeline right now before pre-NEVI funding.
Yeah, it's possible, because I mean, what sort of delay are we looking at, right? Like when did Electrify America and BTC Power and Signet sit down and design these new units, right? Was it 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and they're now being deployed? And like I said, I'm not sure. I do know, though, that we have a number of new charging providers or hardware providers that are stateside, right? We mentioned Lincoln Electric, the welding company, and then Tritium also is bringing manufacturing to domestic manufacturing. So there should be other charging hardware options for Electrify America to choose from. And then hopefully, there needs to be some sort of enforcement of reliability and safety. Like I said, to me, having 2 Rivians catch on fire using BTC power units, that's unacceptable. I mean, and when I mentioned that Signet surge and bricking the Rivian is sort of a study of contrast with the Bolt EV. GM, I think, knew to set some parameters that would shut it down, right? Whereas Rivian, maybe it's just something that got overlooked in their programming. It's not Rivian's fault, to be clear. There shouldn't ever be a charger that's sending more power than the vehicle is asking for. But Rivian needed to account for that ahead of time and build in some safety protocols into their vehicle to prevent that sort of runaway from happening. But to me, it's an indefensible thing anyway to have hardware deployed that could potentially damage customers' vehicles, property, lethal damage, right? You have first responders responding to a fire with high voltage equipment. This is not a place that we want to be. And if it's the quality of the charging equipment that's at fault, then that equipment just simply can't be used, and there needs to be some sort of a certification and review process for it.
So, and we've, this is obviously about Electrify America primarily, but we've talked about the Signet challenges. Delta has been a source of EVgo's win. There's Delta units in the background there, but you can see on the top here, these in Pittsburgh at the sheets here, these are Signet 350 kilowatt stations. Again, fully happy with these. They've been great on our experiences, but do you think there's is the potential is I guess what we're trying to get towards is how much of this is going to be a supplier, a hardware vendor issue across the board, and how much is going to be stuck with the network, the hardware that they've sourced, that they've installed and have to maintain. I think it's hard to call, but obviously we have overlap there, right? With not only the BABA piece, but also the hardware vendors are across the board here. EVgo has certainly gone with Delta in more places from what I've seen. And those 100 kilowatt units, the lower squat ones, are much more, they're always going to be Delta. But Signet's been in probably about half of the EVgo, newer Ultium ready sites that I've seen. Fingers crossed, good so far. But, could we be seeing the same kind of challenges 6 months down the line?
I mean, possibly, but and EVgo also still deploys some BTC power units, right? And so some of them are aging. Again, like I said, some AVB units as well. And I've called that out as a risk for EVgo too. Is just any charging, in my opinion, any charging provider that doesn't build their own equipment is at risk, right? And now you could say that doesn't have to be completely vertically integrated. There just needs to be a partnership there. But that needs to be a strong partnership. And I think maybe we have a bit of a preview with this, Steve, with the Bolt EV, right? With the battery replacement. Clearly, it was not GM's fault. GM ordered a battery off-the-shelf solution from LG. LG had some issues with their processes, and it doesn't matter whose fault it was, it needed to be corrected, but how long was it to just turn that ship around? Now think of that in terms of charging hardware. Get past the blame. Is it BTC quality? Is it Signet quality? I don't really care. Fix the problem, but how long is it going to take to fix that problem? And that's the real concern. And I mean, hopefully it could be as simple as just swapping out internal modules on existing chargers and cabinets so you don't have to do new permitting. But Electrify America is also, this is a little bit off topic, but not really. It's not in our itinerary, but Electrify America is also having issues with California weights and measures. So California weights and measures is now required any DC power charger, public charger, so it doesn't apply to Tesla right now. But any public charger that powers up in California that's a DC charger needs to be certified under weights and measures. And they have a list, and apparently the hardware provider has to pay to be on that list. And in the county weights and measures, they can reach out to those hardware manufacturers, or they can look at the list. I don't know what their protocol is, but we're seeing Electrify America chargers in California being held up by weights and measures because they can't be powered on. So again, this introduces that new thing. They have a certification type list that's under the California Department of Agriculture that they have to fall under. And if they're not listed there and they don't have that certification, those sites can't be powered up. So we have literally dozens and dozens, possibly hundreds of chargers for Electrify America right now in California, and Southern California in particular, that are in the ground, ready to go, that can't be powered up. And changing hardware out, does that change their type certification? Does that change weights and measures? Is that something else that needs to be redone again? So yeah, this is a big problem if there are issues that need to be corrected down the line.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so many more times we can do this. Again, the site behind me has had 3 different hardware providers, and God knows how much more groundwork done. But we're moving into, we've hammered out a bunch of providers there, and the hardware is obviously something we can do a whole show on, because we've still got Chempower, Lincoln Electric. A lot of people mentioned other providers. That's a future episode, I'm afraid, because I must crack the whip and move us on.
Oh no.
So yeah, so I mean, it is actually, that does bring us on to where Cycle 4 spending should go. This is the kind of nub of the future of Electrify America. They use this as looking to the future, but realistically, this is the last kind of gasp, right, before they have to be, they're supposed to exit this in 2026, the end of 2026 at least, as a profitable charging provider nationwide, having spent this $2 billion plus. That I haven't even got into the boost programs and the stuff that we've gone quiet on since they started really getting hammered for reliability. And I do want to, put the caveat again that I have had, almost universally good experiences with Electrify America in all of our trips in the Ioniq 5. The derated stations being more frequent on the last trip across Minnesota is Wisconsin is the kind of caveat to that. Everything else for me has been congestion and maybe a one being offline or something in the larger scheme of things, so maybe causing some backups that way. But I try to stomp for them when I can, in that my experiences have generally been pretty reasonable. But we are coming up to crunch point. There are so many more operators coming through, there are new hardware providers, there is a lot of money going in, and this is the business end of this now.
You keep talking about the reliability, because
I'll just, as you show endless streams of unavailable chargers, I'll say, I will preface that this is Northeast and Midwest. I have never been to California in my EV. So
yeah, and you can always make things look worse than they are, because this station technically wasn't online at this point, but still, you show up at a station in the middle of nowhere and all 4 chargers are down and unavailable. It's a bad look. So
yeah, and I'll hold my hands up. There's been they renovated some stations around here, and the Signet units in there have been great. But they've also released a new one up in Merrimack, New Hampshire, which my buddy Tom at PCs and EVs has headed up to. And there's still cones in the thing. Some of them are offline. They sent the notification. I'll defend them if the station is not online yet and it's not supposed to be visited. But when you fire out an app notification and email saying, "Hey, come to this charger," and then 2 or 3 stations aren't available, then don't expect not to get flamed for it on social media, right? So there are certainly things that they do that do not help them out and hold their own feet to the fire, I think.
Right.
So we've talked about a little bit around the spending and the hardware providers. There's many places they could spend. Site expansion is one of the things we highlighted. What are you thinking in terms of new stations entirely versus expanding out the ones that we've already identified? And the one in back of me, if I change the picture, will say congestion is, if not problem number 1, certainly at the top of the list, pretty close tied.
So I think that 50 miles between stations on interstate corridors and major highways, I think that's an ideal state. I don't think that should be a requirement for any individual network. And so I would be more along the lines of maybe every 100 miles, which still leaves Electrify America with probably another 50 to 100 stations at least that they need to put into the ground for Cycle 4 in various parts of the country. But then the expansion, right, that's the area where I think if it's an interstate, minimum you need to be targeting 8 to 10 stalls. Like, you should never have an interstate corridor site that's less than 8 to 10 stalls. And that's just, I think that needs to be part of their Cycle 4 upgrade path is before we go out of 2026, every single one of our sites that's off of an interstate off ramp or on ramp needs to have 8 to 10 charging stalls.
It's an interesting side note on the coverage and the 50 miles piece. Pennsylvania's map was very clearly, once the NEVI awards came out, routed around Electrify America stations, because over there in the west of Pennsylvania on I-80, they have 2 locations, Du Bois and Clarion, both very close to each other, probably less than 50 miles. And the NEVI funds are all dotted between the Electrify America. So they've clearly gone through this process of, looking at what's already there. And Electrify America has this kind of influence, because they are the nationwide network, public charging network, for the moment. And that's what a lot of these NEVI round 1 awards are going to be put into, placed and cited by. So they have that kind of problem of, if they fail in those locations, suddenly a new gap opens up, right? Because people have planned that first round funding unless someone else goes in, and we haven't seen a long queue of people lining up to fill, small town Pennsylvania charging stations. It's all been around the cities, Pittsburgh, Philly, and Scranton. So, if they suddenly drop the ball, or if, God forbid, if the whole thing comes crashing down, and that does kind of speak to this, who would buy them. But if that happens, then there are going to be new gaps opening up, unless someone else has put in the redundancy that you often advocate for, because we start to get that coverage gap of, well, if they're covered with 50 miles and then one goes offline that was a key site, you're kind of done, right? You've got to do the whole thing again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about it this way: if you're on a highway and the next gas station is 50 miles away, they put a sign up, right? Like, if there's a gap that far between services, now they don't care who provides those services, but if there's a gap, I guess that's that point about the redundancy. So an individual network having a charger every 50 miles, I think, is unnecessarily burdensome. But I think a reasonable network should have no more than 100-mile gap on any interstate.
Yeah, when we talked about that was acceptable gaps. We covered PA's plans a little bit. I have, just back on the site expansion, I think there's going to start to be some issues there, just because of the number of partners that Electrify America has. And this came up a little bit in the Circle K kind of Electrify America site comparison, where the charging provider also owns the property, and they can get all this stuff happening very quickly. I mean, to be fair, the renovations to upgrade a lot of these BTC and Signet 4th generation hardware does seem to have been, accelerated. So they are getting them in the ground, but it has been a year now as well. So it's, I don't know how much an expansion is going to be to actually deal with all of these retail partners and start to say, can we start digging up your lot? We know Walmart is going to go on their own track and start making their, charging network or charging locations, so that if they choose to have them at the same place, they may just say, no, you're not doing anything else. You can have your site for as long as it's leased now, and we'll honor the agreement, but that's the number of spaces you've got. That's how much we're capping you at, and the rest will be us, because we know we can do it better, or we want to give it a crack, right?
Yeah, well, and that's, I think, something where Tesla does a very good job of this, and EA might need to follow suit, is doing analytics for that site usage. Because if EA can come to these businesses and say, well, according to this, we have 1,000 unique visitors to your site every month, that goes a long way to drive businesses to use expansion, or to offer expansion or more parking spaces. But I would also argue, if you're in a situation where you're off an interstate and they only have 4 spots for you and that's all you're going to get, you need to find another location off that same off ramp that will give you another 4 to 6 spots. Yep. And it's really that simple, even if you have 2 sites literally across the street from each other.
And that is fairly common, right? I mean, you think about most of your travels. Mine certainly. I use Pennsylvania as the example. It's the first place we get a little bit rural, in that direction at least. We are, usually whenever we come off, we're seeing not just a Flying J pilot, but also a Travel Plazas of America, or any of the vendors that are competing with them. So usually you do have at least one other lot. Quite often it's 2, 3, 4, even in the rural kind of locations. Yeah. There's lots coming up from Barney here. I want to make sure, and actually he puts one up that kind of leads us into the next thing. It's a bold statement. Take it on.
Yeah. Well, and that's the question we have about J3400, right? The SAE J3400 standard is how is that going to impact Electrify America, especially now that they're using those single cable chargers? Because it's not like before where you could have the Tesla plug on one side and the CCS1 plug on the other. Now you have a split power unit and only one plug. And and I'll let you talk about the was it Olean Evolve New York, their solution there.
Yeah, which I didn't actually load up, which I should have done. We ran out of space, I guess. But so the Evolve New York has been pretty good about first of all, they've served CHAdeMO better than Electrify America has, with usually 2 heads at least at one location on a standard 4-stall install. But they also in locations where the supercharger hasn't been present or nearby, they've put in the CCS to Tesla adapter on a kind of long anti-theft kind of retractable cord. Mm-hmm. So that's somewhere in my shorts somewhere if anyone's really curious to see that pre-operation or pre-activation. But I've got to go back there to see if it's been half-inched and someone's walked away with it. But
and because the other big thing is, I mean, people, and I've harped on this before, is people are conflating the request to access superchargers with adopting that new SAE J3400 standard. And they're not the same thing, right? And so VW Group has not signed on. Hyundai, Kia, Lucid have not signed on to use the superchargers. And so they could be using CCS1 for the foreseeable future, even if SAE homologates that J3400 standard. So we might see slow movement from Electrify America in that regard. And like you said, it might be nothing more than a cable attachment. Because the thing to remember is, even if you're driving a Tesla, if you don't have the module in place, you're not going to be able to use CCS anyway, or the NACS plug anyway, right? And so the only people using it would be CCS-based vehicles, which might have the plug, and if they don't, have an adapter. So they're probably already base CCS1. So there's probably not a huge compelling reason for Electrify America to transition to that new plug format for at least another 3 to 4 years.
The Fredonia, New York, Barney is an unfortunate example, because that's where I've had 4 failures out of 4 with the Magic Dock, or Magic Jack, if I can call him Jack as well, that's fine. But unfortunately, the EGMP cars don't seem to play nice. But even if they did, that site has failed me 4 times. So, and the future of Electrify America, usually it is going across the road to the Walmart in Fredonia, where the Electrify America gives me 200 kilowatts plus. So, that doesn't bode well. You should use Brewster, New York, as your example if you want to expand on the Magic Dock joys. But what else do we have here? Are we missing anything?
Well, the one thing is that Charging Alliance talked about expanding eventually to 400 kilowatt. And I just wanted to talk for a moment about why that's so important. Electrify America is using those balanced chargers. And right now you're splitting basically 175 kilowatt between 2 posts. Whereas if you're expanding to 400 kilowatt, then that's really important, because it means you're going to be able to provide a full 500 amps to both posts. And that means that all those 500 amp cars are still going to be able to hit their 200 kilowatt rate, even if they're sharing power. So that's another expansion or upgrade that I'd like to see Electrify America make, or at least let us know their plans for potentially making it.
Right. I'm sorry, I'm also one eye on the comments here.
Right.
Ben says, I don't know if we've covered this yet, but the Walmart sites will most likely be lost if they have 10-year leases. That would be, Walmart was definitely one of the first partners, which means that we're, as we hit 2027, we are going to start running up on those leases. So as in addition to the perhaps, antagonistic relationship, if that is going to be believed, that Walmart, makes its own competitor to EA, you also get that, the lease is running out, and who takes over that? Maybe Walmart does buy them out on that.
Yeah, and I would like to just call that out right now. I think that would be very stupid of Walmart to do, because the draw is the chargers, and they're not going to make them profitable. They're making profits off the customer. So if I'm a Walmart and I have 4, 6, 8 Electrify America chargers in there, I want you to renew that lease, and those chargers can sit right next to the 6, 8, 10 chargers that I put in under the Walmart network. And then now all of a sudden you have an even more compelling reason for people to stop at my store. So yeah, I think it would be really dumb. This is one of those things where you're better together, right? Like working together.
Yeah, I mean, I can count how many times I was in a Walmart before my Bolt on, partially because we lived in New York City and Boston, which aren't, hubs for those areas, that retailer. But since the Electrify America locations have been placed there, constantly in Walmarts all the time, and not just to pee. We're buying road snacks, camping supplies, all that stuff. So I hate to think how much we've spent. I know my wife would have the receipts. So.
Well, and that's what bothers me about the people who blast Walmart, right? Is that if you go in there, they have the same things that you'd have at a Circle K convenience store, a 7-Eleven, or any of these roadside stops. So it's really about how you choose to use the location. And your 15-minute charge versus my 45-minute charge.
Right. I can tell you in an Ioniq 5, when we've been shopping or I've left my wife to do the shopping and I've done the charge, I am always the winner. So even with the long shops, the 45 minutes, we could have stayed there that length of time. So that's my stay on the right dwell time kind of topic. Adapters. I don't know how much we want to get into this because we have hit time, but the issue with adapters is, there obviously will be big news next year. It's going to be a lot of testing and a lot of that kind of stuff, but we are going to see limitations on adapters, right? They're not going to be the be all and end all. We're going to see restricted amperage. We're going to see people forgetting them. We're going to see them if they're at a location like the Olean one, somewhere they're going to walk off, even if it's not that kind of site. I do think they'll be important, and it's something that will ease that flow. It makes me much less, worried about recommending a CCS car. Certainly, I don't think that's anything that's going to be a problem. You see how long CHAdeMO's lasted and is still being installed. It's not necessarily going to be an issue even more because we have those adapters. But
yeah, I think it's a transitional technology.
Yeah.
We don't even know if this J3400 plug is what we're going to settle on as an industry, right? So,
alrighty. So we've kind of gone all around the future of Electrify America. I don't know if anyone has actually, given a final judgment and banged the gavel. How do you feel? Is it a network that is entirely doomed and will be picked apart for scraps come the 2027 kind of look?
I think it depends on who you're talking to until there's another second biggest charging network to threaten the biggest charging network. I think EA will be doomed. But yeah, I think they have a lot going for them. It's just I'm concerned that we haven't seen it yet. Like you said, what I would really like to see them do is lay out a very clear cycle 4 plan that addresses the gaps, that addresses the hardware concerns, that addresses the site sizes. But for the most part, like, they are the face of public charging right now. They're the ones that everybody looks at when they talk about public charging. And I don't see that changing in the next 5 to 10 years. I do think that they're going to be able to survive. And I think if VW Group or the automotive group is relying heavily enough on them, they're going to get the additional funding that they need to keep going, to keep expanding, and to keep improving. Because that charging alliance, that 7 automaker charging alliance, they didn't even reach out to VW Group. They didn't even invite them. So you might see Electrify America just continue to be the de facto VW charging network moving forward for the next however many years.
I wanted to bring Walter's point back up quickly, just because it kind of resonates with me that, I was been panning EVgo for most of 2022 because their sites were old, they generally didn't work, the equipment was being, deprecated or was just in the wrong place, like a solo 50 kilowatt charger on the Mass Pike service area, and they have turned it around, for me at least, in my travels, exactly that. But I wonder how long that lasts, right? And is there another wave coming for Electrify America potentially? Because all this new hardware is going in the ground. EVgo was putting in a lot of new hardware last year, and now maybe we're seeing the benefit of it. If my experiences with this new Electrify America hardware kind of continue and it does prove to be more reliable, then I don't see why they can't kind of ride that wave to at least a slightly better. They've got way more locations to potentially go wrong, and I don't know how much they can renovate all of them. But to me, it comes down to management and how well the team that's there now, that is obviously presumably going to be in place for this the remainder of this cycle 4, actually drives not just the reliability but the supporting their team with what they need. Because I think, having met the technicians, having talked to the people on the ground, I've seen more maintenance crews out. I've seen people working on this stuff, and there's, like you pointed out, there's only so much they can do if the hardware is going to crap every few weeks. There's they can turn it around, they can go back out, and it'll be down the next week. So these problem areas, if they can take this, what they've done on the New York Thruway from my travels, and rip out the bad stuff, put in good stuff, and have it keep performing this stuff in the background, if that's getting ripped out again in 12 months time, then I think that is the death knell for this network, because they don't have endless funds. There's going to be a point where they have to start proving that they've operated in this vacuum, as you said, the face of public charging, and the only one that people go to, which is conversely why I think they get such a hard rap, because this is what people constantly run up against. This is the network they have to go to. Once there are competitors, once the money starts running out, it comes down to you simply have to have a reliable network. It simply has to be hardware, agreements in place with people that you can turn around site maintenance and renovation quickly, all this kind of stuff. And if you make that happen, I think they're in pole position, among the public charging networks as they are, Tesla notwithstanding. But there's a lot of road in front of them to make that happen.
I agree completely. And I think that ironically, alleviating pressure on Electrify America is only going to help them. So if there's a place that people can go and give them some time to work out those kinks, then we have a little bit more room. Yes, this is our slow cue to wrap up. There's a little bit of admin we want to do first. We've covered Are They Doomed, and I don't know if either of us made a grand proclamation, but we like that odd network that hasn't been named yet, kind of like Voldemort. Shall not be named. We shall be named, but we're going to pass it on to you guys and to anybody else that kind of captures this as we move along, at least to the extent of once we narrow it down to a few shortlist contenders. So I don't actually have any right now. We're thinking in the realm of DC fast charging, future fueling puns. You had some there, Eric. Do you want to kind of ideas? Yeah. So I was thinking that we could call this like the Between Two Chargers webcast.
I actually am between two chargers.
or my pet favorite was the Charging Protocols webcast, just because covers all the bases. We're talking about chargers, we're talking about the technology behind them, we're also talking about the etiquette behind them. So
there's a lot, and we also wanted to make sure we didn't do destination charging and level 2 a disservice. So DCFC maybe, but please watch out for that on our community posts and any social media that we choose to use. We will be polling the audience very soon to kind of figure out what this will be called. So name suggestions are welcome, but we'll present a short list and we'll see how it kind of comes together. I have this is everything from me. I got a video up today on Circle K and Electrify America competing in the same location, Pine City, Minnesota, if anybody wants something to watch after this. Eric has done a bunch of really good kind of redux videos, kind of clipping out some of the good stuff from previous discussions on the J3400 standard and a bunch of other stuff.
Which I need to get busy on.
Keep doing, again. There's a lot of gold in those hills. You just got to pickaxe to the face. So We seem to hit this 1 minute, 1 hour 8 and 1 hour 9 minutes every time, but I'll get it before it hits 1 hour 10. So thank you everybody for tuning in. We're really enjoying these. As a reminder, we'll have the Wednesday slot, 5 p.m. Pacific and 8 p.m. Eastern. So that'll come up again. It's bi-weekly, so we're doing this every other week, fortnightly, as we say in my motherland. But we appreciate you for watching, and I intended to call you Monsieur Coulomb tonight. So merci beaucoup.
De nada.
We'll make it multilingual. Yeah, we'll just get on the thing. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. We'll see you in the next.
Thank you.
Cheers.